Thank you for coming back to the privacy legislation in Canada presentation. So we're going to focus on Canada's anti-spam law next, also known as CASL or CASL. You'll often hear it called CASL because Canada's anti-spam law is a bit of a mouthful. This area does have a lot of acronyms, and I will use some of them, but I'll try to define them as we go through. So what Canada's anti-spam law does is it dictates the do's and don'ts of electronic communication, including commercial electronic messages. The other aspect of the regulation is it also regulates installing software on someone else's computer. So if you're engaged in a business where you do that, you'd want to refer back to the CASL legislation that we have a direct link to in your Moodle resources and specifically look up those regulations because in this privacy presentation, we're specifically going to look at electronic communication and commercial electronic messages. When we look at electronic communication, CASL regulates this in three areas. The first is consent, which you'll remember from the section on PIPEDA. Consent is a little bit different in this area, but the basic premise is still the same. The second area is identification, and then the third area is unsubscribing. Consent and unsubscribing are both to deal with whatever the customer's requests are under CASL. Identification is about the information you as a business have to provide in your electronic messages. The big difference between direct privacy legislation like the Privacy Act and PIPEDA is in those types of legislation, specifically the Privacy Act applies to the public sector or governments, and PIPEDA applies to the private sector or corporations. CASL applies to all commercial electronic messages regardless of what industry that someone is in. So if a commercial electronic message is sent by someone in the government or someone in a private company, both of those are regulated under Canada's anti-spam law. So we'll get started with talking about what a CEM is. So this is one of those acronyms I talked about. It's a commercial electronic message. So what that means is that I'll break it down into two parts, the electronic message part and the commercial part. So an electronic message, as defined by CASL, is any communication that's sent by means of telecommunication. Most commonly, this is regulating email messages or text messages, but this would also apply to an online instant message. It could apply to you directing someone to a website through an electronic message. It also could, by this definition, apply to a message that you send by fax as well, because telecommunication means any message that's sent digitally or electronically. So the second part of CEM is the commercial part. And what that means is that a message is commercial if the content in your message is leading someone to engage in a purchase or other financial exchange with you. So if you're trying to get them to buy one of your products, or perhaps invest in your company, or make a donation to an organization that you're representing, all three of those things would be considered commercial purposes. So always keep both parts of this in mind. So is a message electronic? So are you sending it by telecommunication? And is it commercial? Are you trying to sell something? So now that we have mastered the definition of a commercial electronic message, we're going to move back on to the three things that are regulated within commercial electronic messages: consent, identification, and unsubscribing. Under CASL, consent can be of two kinds. It can be express consent or implied consent. So express consent is when your customer is specifically giving you their authorization to be able to communicate with them for commercial purposes. So when you buy a lot of products, you'll often see a little statement at the end of the purchase asking if you want to receive updates and other offers from the company. That is that company asking you for express consent. So if you check that box off, you're saying that for as long as you want, you can send commercial electronic messages to me because I have agreed to this. The second kind of consent is implied consent. Now, implied consent is the consent you receive by someone having purchased something from you. So when someone purchases a product or other service from you, if you are advertising a related product, you can send them commercial electronic messages about that under implied consent. It's based around what a person could reasonably be expected to expect for information from you about. So what you sell should be reasonably related to the product you've sold them. One thing that we use implied consent at Business Career College around is if someone buys our life insurance self-study course and we may send them information about seminars to help them prepare for the exams for that course if they have given us implied consent. Now, regardless of which type of consent a person gives you, they can withdraw that consent at any time, and you're required to stop sending them commercial electronic messages. Like I said, they can withdraw that consent at any time. It could be when they purchase with you, they could say, I don't want any electronic messages. Then even your implied consent would be gone. It can be just after, or it can be years down the road. Now, as soon as you get that consent, you should stop sending the messages as soon as possible, but you do have up to 10 days to stop sending those messages. We'll look more specifically at that in the section on unsubscribing. The second regulated part of commercial electronic messages is identification. And like I said, identification is about identifying the business that's sending that message. So let's look at some more specifics on what's required in identification. So we are required to identify 4 main things when we send a commercial electronic message. Now, these 4 things are intended to clearly identify who the sender is. So the first thing is the name of the business. So in every commercial electronic message, you want to identify the name of the business. So this is a sample of a commercial electronic message that we from Business Career College might send. I've highlighted 3 parts on this message where you can see the name Business Career College. This is how we are identifying the name of the business who's sending the commercial electronic message. The next thing that you want to identify is the name of the sender and the identity of the sender of the message. So this means the specific person who's sending this message out to you or out to the client. So again, in this example of a message, we can see that Kelly, a person in our marketing department, sent this message out, and we've identified Kelly with his email address in the first or second line of this email. So you can see that this has been sent from Kelly at businesscareercollege.com. The third and fourth parts that you want to identify in a message are the physical location of the sender, the email address, phone number, or other contact information of the sender. Now, the physical location is required in the commercial electronic message, as well as some other way to contact the sender. You don't have to have the email address, phone number, and another contact method for the sender, but you need at least one of those things in place. Looking for a third time at this same commercial message, you can see that at the bottom of the email, we've highlighted in orange and pointed at it with a green arrow our physical address. So this is the physical address of our head office of Business Career College. Now, the other 3 highlighted areas in this commercial electronic message are ways people could communicate with us. Now, you don't have to have all 3 of these, but we have Kelly's email address, we have our toll-free phone number, and we have our website. Any of those three things would be good enough to provide the contact information for the sender of the message. So just as a review, your message has to include the name of the business, in our case, Business Career College, the name of the sender, in our message it was Kelly, the physical location of the sender, that's where we had the address of our head office, and then one of the three ways of communicating with the sender, either email address, phone number, or some other defined way of communicating with them, like our company website in our case. The third part of regulations on commercial electronic messages is unsubscribing. So let's go through that in a little more detail. Now, every commercial electronic message has to have a clear and simple way to allow customers to understand how to stop communication from you. That's all unsubscribing means, is it's a way for a customer to stop the communication from you. Now, these details, like I said, have to be in every commercial electronic message that you send. So even if you've sent 10 other commercial electronic messages to the same person, if in the 11th message you don't have a way for them to unsubscribe, you're not complying with Canada's anti-spam law. So it has to be there every time you send it. All of these three things have to be there every time you send a message. Now, once you have a way for someone to unsubscribe, you have to make that change within 10 days. And then the fourth part of this is that you can't charge a fee to unsubscribe the person. So you want to have some free way that the person can unsubscribe from your messages. Now, there are a few different ways you can look at this. One would be a line at the bottom of your email telling someone to stop receiving messages. Please email callin@businesscareercollege.com, and we'd be happy to unsubscribe you. Now, we in our emails use a direct link that I'll show you in the next slide here. So we use a service called Safe Unsubscribe. You can see it highlighted and indicated with a blue arrow at the bottom of this slide. When a customer sees this email, it would say Safe Unsubscribe, and then where it says recipient's email, it would show their email address. Once they click on that, it asks them to confirm that they want to unsubscribe from emails from Business Career College, and once they do that, their commercial electronic messages are automatically stopped. Now that we've reviewed the rules around Canada's anti-spam law, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about compliance to Canada's anti-spam law. So compliance with CASL is managed by the CRTC. That stands for the Canadian Radio, Television and Telecommunications Commission. This is not the police and it's not the government themselves. This is a government agency. So unlike the Privacy Act and PIPEDA, which were managed by the Privacy Commissioner, this act is managed by an outside government agency. Now, the CRTC is the same group that manages compliance with regulations around Canadian television content, as well as the rules on cell phone service provision and internet service provision in Canada. So you may be familiar with the CRTC from there. Now, if you're in violation of CASL, CRTC can issue warnings or fines. What they've stated on the Fight Spam website that is in place to give you updates about CASL is that they would prefer to first issue warnings and corrections to you, and that their intent is only to issue fines when someone is regularly and egregiously violating CASL. But when it comes to the fines, if you're an individual, you can be fined up to $1 million per infraction, and if you're a business, up to $10 million per infraction. So that's a very large financial fine, and this is the first time that we see an act that is enforceable directly by a fine. If you remember, when someone's in violation of PIPEDA, they can be sued by someone through the court system, but the Privacy Commissioner can't issue a fine directly. Under CASL, you can be issued a direct fine. So now that we've looked at the compliance piece, let's turn and look at some ways that we can prevent some of these negative things from happening. So let's look at the best practices for CASL. So I talked a little bit earlier about our unsubscribe mechanism, and that's part of an email marketing program that we use here at Business Career College. This program is a dream for me in terms of CASL because if we use that program, it almost completely eliminates the potential for us to be in violation of CASL because it builds all of the protections into the system regarding CASL. Right from the very start, when we put a person's email address into our email marketing program, it asks us if we have consent. If we don't have consent, it won't allow us to add them to the program. So we've already started off on good footing there. Once you say that you have consent, it asks you if it's express consent or implied consent. If it's implied consent, it applies the timeline of how long that consent is valid for automatically to their email address, and then we'll remove their email address from the system once that time expires. So we've already got the first piece of consent covered by using this marketing program. The second piece, identification, is also covered in the program. So all of the times we saw the contact information and the physical address in the example email that I showed you, that is put in there by the system and we can't remove that. So it forces you to put the physical address and the contact information in your commercial electronic message. The third thing it manages for you is the unsubscribe process. And like I said when I was talking about the unsubscribe, as soon as a student uses that unsubscribe button, our email marketing system will no longer let us send an email to that student. In fact, it will keep that email unsubscribed until the student logs in and updates their preferences with us. So if we want a student to get emails again, even if they tell us that they want those emails, we have to send them a link to update their information in our system. So an email marketing program can be inexpensive, and it can cover all of these things for you, eliminating a lot of the worries around commercial electronic marketing messages. Now, I said it virtually eliminates having to manage that. We do need to train ourselves and all of my reports on what they need to know about CASL because they may send a direct email to a customer not thinking it's a commercial message. If they do that, they just have to make sure they have those three things in there again. So they've gotten consent to send it. They've identified the sender in it, and they have a way for the person to stop receiving messages and unsubscribe that person when they request it. CASL maintains a website called fightspam.gc.ca. You know it's a government website by the .gc.ca ending, so it is a trustworthy source and the best source for any updates about CASL. And we've also included one of their documents, Protect Your Organization from Threats, in your Moodle course materials. This is more specifically related to the download of programs on other computers and general protection of information under CASL. But CASL has many bulletins and infographics on their website, and I encourage you to visit their website and make sure you're completely up to date on everything that they've posted there because it does change from time to time.